This is no ordinary book review. No. For tonight, we review one of the most frightening young adult pieces of literature of all time. Bruce Coville's Spirits and Spells. Okay, the fact that I'm in my pajamas kind of ruins the atmosphere, doesn't it? No. So in the mid-90s, Bruce Coville published a series of books called his Chamber of Horror series, and we are using the word series very, very loosely here because once again, the characters and the plot and all that sort of thing really have nothing to do with each other within the books. And in fact, this is even less of a series in that sense than the Magic Shop books because there's not even a mystical, magical shop to connect these stories. Literally the only connection between these four books is that they were spooky. Kind of extensions of the type of ghost stories that you would tell around the campfire, say. There were 4 of these books published, 2 of them made it onto the favorites list. This is the second one that he published, Spirits and Spells. It's interesting to note the subject matter of the books that made it onto the favorites list. I mean, we have a book about a demon-possessed amulet, a book about a role-playing game becoming real, a book about a possessed tarot deck, and a book about a ghost. And the 2 books that made it onto the favorites list are the one about the role-playing game and the tarot deck. What can I say? So Spirits and Spells is a role-playing game along the same lines as Dungeons & Dragons and Magic the Gathering and that sort of thing. There are a few key differences, however. With this role-playing game, you don't make up your own characters. The characters are designed for you. The characters are this group of magicians who are trapped in a house, and there's a whole backstory and everything that I won't get into for this review, but it's a pretty intense and complicated game. Travis, an avid gamer, found this game and introduced it to his friends, and then decided that just to make it seem a little bit more real, they should put it in an actual spooky sort of house. So they find this old mansion that's been abandoned for years, but that he has a key for. They go into this house and they decide to play the game there. Now, one aspect of this game is that the characters have to find things throughout the house, and so in order to make this a little bit more real, Travis actually hides the items that they need to find. And as these 6 kids are progressing through the game, they find that the game is becoming progressively more and more real. For example, they're each given powers as these magicians, and they find throughout the game that they can actually use these powers. In addition, some of them are hearing the voices of the characters in their heads, trying to get in and take control. And as often happens in Bruce Coville novels, they find that there is a lot more going on here than just a simple game. Obviously, this is in the horror genre, and I really got into Bruce Coville's horror stories because I really liked the way that he wrote the genre. His horror stories usually kind of meshed with fantasy or science fiction or something like that, and he usually had a pretty intricate backstory. Now, there were 2 things that I really liked about this novel when I first read it. The first was the game. Now, I've never actually been a gamer, but it's certainly not for lack of interest, more lack of exposure. I never knew that these types of games existed, but I did enjoy playing games of the same sort, and I also enjoyed making up characters and creating things like that. And the second thing that I loved about this book was the house, which, of course, is haunted, and I love haunted houses. I think that's my favorite aspect of any horror story is a haunted house. If it's got a haunted house, I'm probably gonna love it. And it's no coincidence that many of my early stories that I wrote around this time were focused around haunted houses. Now, there's not quite as much to this novel as there is to some of his others. Part of that is because instead of having only 1 protagonist, there are actually 6, and the story is kind of spread out between them. And so we really don't get as much character development out of them. But that's not really the point of this story. The point of this story is to introduce us to these other characters, these backstory characters, and to kind of give us a glimpse at their history. And actually, as I was rereading it, I was kind of surprised that I was still really getting into the story. There are a lot of moments where you're reading it and you're thinking, okay, yeah, this is a novel written for 12 and 13-year-olds. But really, this is a pretty compelling story. It's got a creative premise, it's got great atmosphere, and it keeps you wanting to keep reading. I don't know if I would go so far as to call this a good book, but it is an interesting book and an entertaining book. It definitely kept me entertained, and so for that reason, more than anything, it is staying on the favorites list. And for the next book review, the other book from the Chamber of Horrors series that is on the favorites list, Eyes of the Tarot. My face is in shadow again.
This is your dual nature, like we see later.
Right. Okay. I'm going to go now before this gets strange. Bye. Travis, an avid gamer. Travis. Words, sentences.
Travis.
Travis.